Okay, so you want to own an ice cream shop, scoop happiness for a living, watch the line form out the door on a hot Saturday, close up a little early on a slow winter night, and just do it all again next spring. That's the picture in your head, and on the surface, it's not wrong. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why a Cold Stone Creamery location, averaging $587,000 a year in sales, hands its owner a lot less than that number suggests. The specific clause buried inside almost every ice cream franchise agreement that quietly cost one Texas operator 30 locations in a single year. And why one of the most beloved ice cream chains in New England, a company we're going to come back to by name in a few minutes, just filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, 17 years after it looked like it had figured this entire business out. Here's the last thing, and it's the one that actually matters. An ice cream shop isn't really a 12-month business. It's a 7-month business wearing a 12-month lease, and almost everyone who opens one learns that the hard way. Let's start with the size of the thing. The US ice cream market is worth roughly $18 in 2026. The specific slice of that made up of standalone ice cream stores, not grocery store pints, not gas station freezers, actual scoop shops, sits around $7.4 billion, and it's decelerating. 5.8% growth over the last 5 years, but just 0.9% in 2025 alone. Here's the number that explains almost everything else in this video. Roughly 75% of a typical shop's annual revenue happens in just 4 to 5 months of the year, not a soft seasonal lean. 3/4 of everything you'll make this year concentrated into the exact stretch of calendar between late spring and early fall. So before you sign a lease, you need to understand that not all ice cream businesses are the same business wearing a different cone. The independent scoop shop gives you full control over recipes, pricing, and hours, but zero brand recognition on day one. A franchise like Cold Stone Creamery gets you a proven layout, a known name, and an average unit volume of $587,000 a year. Genuinely strong revenue for a small storefront, in exchange for a total investment of $121,000 to $655,000, and ongoing fees of 6% royalty, plus 3% marketing, 9 cents of every gross dollar, gone before your own costs are even subtracted. A soft serve or fast food adjacent model like Dairy Queen trades the artisanal feel for drive-through volume and year-round menu items that smooth out some of the seasonal cliff. And the mobile ice cream truck route sidesteps rent entirely, at the cost of a much smaller daily ceiling on how much product you can physically sell. Now, what does it actually cost to open the doors on an independent shop? A walk-in freezer alone runs $8,000 to $20,000 installed. Dipping cabinets to hold your actual product at proper serving temperature run $4,000 to $12,000 each, and a real shop needs at least 2 or 3. A soft-serve machine, if you're running one, costs $6,000 to $18,000 per unit. Add a point-of-sale system, seating, signage, and the build-out itself. Walls, flooring, plumbing for a hand wash and mop sink, ventilation, and a modest independent shop lands somewhere between $150,000 and $400,000 before your grand opening, depending heavily on whether you're building out a raw space or taking over an existing food service location. Here's the trap inside the trap, and it's not the freezer or the build-out cost. It's the 7 and 12 problem. Your rent, insurance, base staffing, and loan payments are due in January, exactly the same as they're due in July. But 75% of your revenue is showing up in a 4 to 5 month window. That means a shop doing $500,000 a year isn't earning roughly $42,000 a month evenly. It might be earning $75,000 to $90,000 a month from May through September, and $15,000 to $20,000 a month the rest of the year, against fixed costs that don't care what month it is. Owners who don't build a real cash reserve during the summer to specifically fund the winter aren't running a seasonal business well. They're running a business that quietly can't pay its own bills for 7 months out of 12, hoping the next summer arrives before the checking account hits zero. Now here's the part almost nobody thinks about when they picture the store, and it flips the naive assumption most people walk in with. You'd assume the ice cream itself is where the money is. It isn't, not primarily. Base ice cream, the scoop itself, typically carries a real but modest margin once you account for dairy costs, which have been climbing hard due to rising milk prices and tariffs on Canadian dairy imports pushing up the cost of the cream and butter fat, that go into every batch. The toppings bar, the mix-ins, the hot fudge, the waffle cone upgrade, the stuff that feels like a small add-on to the customer, carries dramatically better margin because it's mostly sugar, packaging, and labor rather than a dairy commodity exposed to tariff swings. A shop that treats the topping bar as an afterthought next to the ice cream case is leaving the best margin part of the transaction sitting there, optional, instead of built into the base experience, the way Cold Stone built mix-ins into its entire brand identity from day one. The scoop gets them in the door. The toppings are where the shop actually keeps its money. Now, you need to understand the structural mechanism buried inside almost every ice cream franchise agreement, because it's the thing that quietly ended 30 locations for one operator in a single year. Franchise agreements in this industry typically include a mandatory remodel or reinvestment clause, a requirement that franchisees periodically update their store's look, equipment, or branding on the franchisor's timeline at the franchisee's expense, or risk losing the franchise entirely. In the first half of 2025, roughly 30 Dairy Queen locations across Texas, operated by a franchisee group called Project Lone Star, had their franchise rights pulled by American Dairy Queen, specifically for failing to complete required remodels. The moment that happened, those locations legally couldn't order supplies from the parent company anymore and had to shut down, not because customers stopped coming, not because the ice cream was bad, but because a clause about paint and signage buried in a contract most owners sign once and never reread again. Now here's a real company, a real name, and a real collapse. Because nothing teaches this lesson better than watching it happen to an operator who genuinely built something real. Meet Batch Ice Cream. It started in 2009 as a single ice cream truck serving the Boston area, founded by Susie Parrish and Veronica Janssens. In 2018, the founders sold the business to new owners, David and Deborah LaReach, who expanded it into 2 full retail shop locations in Longmeadow and South Hadley, Massachusetts, plus 2 ice cream trucks. A genuine, gradual, well-regarded growth story, the kind of small regional chain people drive across town for. In May of 2026, Batch Ice Cream filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy to reorganize its business, listing several unsecured debts as disputed. The shops and trucks kept operating normally through the filing. This wasn't a business anyone had stopped loving. It wasn't isolated either. Rite Aid's bankruptcy in May of 2025 took down all 500 of its in-store Thrifty ice cream counters with it, liquidated by October. 2 separate Rita's Italian Ice franchisees, one in St. John's, Florida, one in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, filed Chapter 11 within 3 weeks of each other in the summer of 2025. And Dairy Queen alone has closed more than 46 locations nationwide since early 2025, including a 40-year-old Arizona Travel Center location lost to a lease dispute, and 3 Alaska locations closed abruptly with no public explanation at all. Here's the through line connecting all of them. None of these businesses failed because people stopped wanting ice cream. The category grew every single year through this entire stretch, even if growth slowed. What connects a 17-year-old regional chain, a national drugstore's in-store counter program, and multiple individual franchisees across 3 states is the same structural squeeze happening from different directions. Rising dairy input costs cutting into already seasonal margins, franchise obligations like mandatory remodels, adding capital demands on operators who may not have had the cash reserve to absorb them, and a revenue model that only really works if the owner planned for the 7 lean months as carefully as they planned for the 5 good ones. A shop can be genuinely loved, genuinely busy every July, and still be one undercapitalized winter away from a filing. If you're finding this breakdown useful, this is a good moment to hit subscribe and drop a like. It genuinely helps a channel like this keep making videos like this one. So who actually wins in this business? Almost never the operator who treats the summer surge as the whole year's story and spends accordingly the moment the register starts ringing. It's the shops disciplined enough to hold back a real reserve every single summer, specifically earmarked for December through March, treating the lean months as a certainty to plan for, not a bad surprise to react to. It's the operators who build genuine off-season revenue, holiday catering, wholesale pints sold into local grocery and coffee shops, a winter menu pivot toward hot chocolate and heated seating that keeps the doors worth opening in February. It's the shops that build their topping bar and mix-in program as seriously as their base flavor lineup, because that's where the real margin lives, once dairy costs are accounted for. And it's the franchise owners who read every remodel and reinvestment clause before they sign, budgeting for that mandatory capital expense years in advance, instead of discovering it the way Project Lone Star's 30 locations did. Now let's run the numbers two ways, using that same real $587,000 Cold Stone style average, because seeing them side by side is more convincing than any warning I could give you. The optimistic scenario: you've built a genuine winter reserve during the summer months, layered in wholesale and catering revenue that keeps some cash moving year-round, maximized your topping and mix-in program, and stayed current on every franchise obligation well ahead of deadline. Landing at a healthy 12 to 15% net margin on that $587,000, that's $70,000 to $88,000 in owner profit for the year, a real, sustainable small business income. The realistic scenario: dairy costs tick up again the way they have across recent years. You didn't build a big enough reserve during your best summer because it felt like the new normal instead of a seasonal peak, and a mandatory remodel notice arrives from the franchisor requiring $40,000 to $80,000 in reinvestment on a timeline you didn't budget for. Run that same $587,000 in revenue through that reality, and your margin doesn't land near 12 to 15%. It lands in the low single digits, or requires financing the remodel with debt that then has to be serviced through next year's 7 lean months too, while the shop, every single sunny Saturday, still looks exactly as busy and exactly as beloved as it did the year the math worked. So is owning an ice cream shop worth it? It offers something genuinely rare, a product people are emotionally attached to, a business that can become a real community fixture, and margins on the right parts of the menu that reward an operator who understands where they actually live. But it demands treating this as a 7-month cash flow problem wrapped in a 12-month lease, not a simple sell more ice cream business. It demands reading the reinvestment clause in any franchise agreement as carefully as the operators at Project Lone Star wish, in hindsight, they had. And it demands understanding that the topping bar, not the base scoop, is where the real margin has been hiding in plain sight the entire time. Every number in this script, the 75% of revenue crammed into 5 months, the mandatory remodel clause that ended 30 locations in a single year, the 17-year-old chain that filed for Chapter 11, not because anyone stopped loving its ice cream, exists for one reason. It filters out the people who wanted to sell scoops from the people who understood exactly which 5 months were going to have to fund the other 7. The freezer, the dipping cabinets, and the flavor board are the easy part. What separates the shop still scooping in year 20 from the one that quietly restructures in year 17 was never how good the ice cream was. It was whether the owner planned for winter while it was still summer. If you want the deeper version of this, how businesses like this one are actually structured, priced, and scaled step by step, check the channel for more videos, and it's worth a look no matter which business you're most curious about. If this video helped you see an ice cream shop a little differently, go ahead and like it, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching.